Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
With Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. My guest today is Dr. Tina Marie Waliczek Cade. She's a professor of horticulture at Texas State University. So we're going to talk about her work there. She researches urban and plant interactions, so plants in urban environments, the effect of green spaces on people and how it makes them feel emotionally and otherwise, changes their quality of life. She's worked in horticulture for quite a long time and agriculture, so I think it'll be a very interesting interview. So welcome, Tina. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, if you would, tell me a bit about your background and then how you ended up at Texas State.
Well, I studied at Kansas State University for my bachelor's in horticultural therapy and continued with a master's in horticulture there at Kansas State. I did my doctoral work at Texas A&M in College Station. I started my teaching career at Illinois State and Bloomington Normal, and honestly, it was just a little chilly there, so I came back to Texas, and I've been teaching here at Texas State for 23 years.
Oh, wow. Well, you said something in your bio, horticultural therapy. What is that?
Horticultural therapy is working with plants as a therapeutic modality, and, when I first began studying it, it was used a lot with special populations of people to try to help them with, some sort of condition, whether it be senior citizens that had arthritis and needed help with fine motor skills, or working with developmentally disabled people to try to teach them job skills. But as I was beginning my studies there, one thing that I wanted to do was to try to document the benefit of horticulture and working with plant materials to more of a general population. So my master's study was with community gardens and looking into effects on quality of life.
So, to start with, horticultural therapy, what kind of results did it get for people? Like what kind of activities did they do and what did they report as how they felt once they did them?
Well, we've worked with a variety of different groups, and we've worked with both active and passive interactions with plants over the years. We've done a lot of different work with school gardens and a few with community gardens, and then some studies that are just, more passive interactions. So, for instance, with school gardens, we've studied everything from the effects on perceptions of attitudes towards school and interpersonal relationships with children and things like self-esteem. We've looked into nutrition and whether kids would be willing to eat more of, the produce if they actually were to grow it. Lately, we've been researching when children work with plant materials in a garden and they're developing like schoolyard habitat, if that helps them feel a little bit more empowered with the environment, because a lot of kids are encountering what people are calling eco-anxiety. And so we want to give them ways that they can empower themselves to feel like they're making a difference, in the environment through their little actions. So, most of the stuff that we've studied has shown benefits to kids getting out in nature, of course.
What were some of the benefits that you saw that, that made you happy? Like, oh, cool, this is helping people. Like, what was your reaction to participating in these studies with the kids?
Well, of course, we hope that we can document some of the beneficial effects of getting kids outside. Over the last few decades, there have been, kids just don't get outside and play so much. And we've even kind of studied that, where parents are a little more apprehensive to let their children go out and just play due to all sorts of things, everything from they are worried about them getting dirty, or there's that whole stranger danger thing that they might get scooped up or apprehended. And we've looked into that, and throughout most of our studies, we found that kids out in nature doing things in the garden, either through a form of study in a school garden or as like an after school activity, is beneficial. So we've studied some of those variables that I mentioned regarding nutrition and interpersonal relationships, and both before and after COVID, and environmental attitudes, and, eco-anxiety, eco-empowerment. We've looked at the effects of working in the garden to achieve things like better science scores, or, applying math skills in the garden. And overall, we just found tremendous, evidence that it's good to get kids out in the garden.
How do you feel working in the garden? Like, why do you do what you do? What does it do for you emotionally, you feel like?
Oh, I hate to be inside for too long. I like to see the wonders of nature. And of course, being outside, I just feel more comfortable in a green environment. I guess that's why I ended up where I did. But I have a hard time sitting still too. And of course, we haven't done studies on kids with things like ADHD, but there have been studies that show that children who have that, and we're trying to get them to focus on something, do better if they're in a green environment, where you would maybe say that there are a whole lot of distractions, versus if we stick them in an area that just is blank white walls. We did do a study, and I really liked this one, where we had three university professors at Texas State who taught the same course 2 different times in a day on the same subject. Those courses were psychology and sociology, and so they had the same content with the same teacher. They were just taught at different times of the day. And for the first course offering and the first set of students, we just had the teacher teach it as they normally would. And the second group, we would haul in plants. And so there were, one section with plants was taught and one section with no plants, but with the same content and the same teachers. And then we looked into, at the end of the semester, the students do a course and instructor evaluation. And each of the courses, the students rated the teacher and the content as being more understandable, and the teacher as doing better for that semester. We saw the biggest effect in the one classroom that didn't have any windows in it. So one of the classrooms was considered to be kind of the best in some measurements, because it was the most modern, but it was a stark auditorium style classroom where, it was just blank walls down to a screen. And that room was the most difficult to arrange plants in, because it would be fire hazards if we blocked the aisleways, but we tried to put bigger plants down towards the teachers. But at the end of the semester, when we were talking with the instructors, one of the things that came up was whether or not it was the students who were maybe reacting to the plant materials, or if possibly the instructors felt more comfortable in in the classroom with the plants around them as well, and if that made them potentially do a better job in some way. So sometimes research just makes you ask more questions.
Okay. This probably relates into the green spaces, how the public reacts. So what do you notice there when you have a green space? Like, what was the experimental setup like?
When I'm not sure that I'm understanding. So
You said you evaluated the effect of green spaces on people that use them in the public. If I had that right, what kind of experimentation have you done with the public and with green spaces?
we've worked with particular types of group but not necessarily just with, a general public. I can, tell you that there have been studies on economics of like retail areas where sometimes, they will take out trees or maybe scrimp on things like landscaping when there are budget cuts. And some research has shown that the public responds more to things like beautiful plants and trees in a retail area rather than giant pink blow-up gorillas or rainbow plastic flags to garner attention towards a business. So,
Oh, really? Like even what kind of things were evaluated?
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
well, they looked at retail shopping areas. So these studies were done by Kathleen Wolf from Washington, and she looked into the economics of, how much money was spent at various shopping areas when there were and were not plants. And people responded more and rated a retail area as being like a higher quality space when there were plants around.
Okay, any other effects?
Not that I know of on those studies, but yeah, our research has looked into groups like, like I said, kids. We're currently doing some studies with seniors. We've looked at veterans, community gardens, college students, those kinds of things.
Okay. Have you been there to observe, or was it just reported findings that you read about? Or have you been on site and seen people interact in environments where there's a lot more plants, let's say?
I've been in the environments that we've studied.
I mean, while they were doing the experimentation, or just anecdotally, have you sat there and noticed what people do?
We don't usually do like observational types of data. We will, have an instrument to measure the variables.
Okay. I can tell you one personal experience. Years ago, we lived in a house with a deck, in the backyard, and my wife put 40 or 50 plants around the periphery of the deck, and you grew tomatoes and a bunch of other stuff. And you still had room to sit on the deck, but you were in the middle of this little mini forest, essentially. And the air smelled nicer and fresher, and there was bees, pollinating stuff. And it just created a really nice environment. It's I just felt calmer and happier to be amongst the plants. And it just was a really cool environment that she created, this micro environment on the deck. It was so much nicer than when it was empty, when it was bare. So I'm guessing that's probably what people experience.
Wrong. I mean, I guess we did do one study in our library setting where we were looking at the effect of the interior scaping within different regions of the library. And we did find that students would move towards areas that had more windows and plants. We studied a little bit of this effect on business people, so people working in offices. We looked at the effect of whether or not they worked in an environment that had a window or a plant or both or neither. And so we asked them what sort of office environment they worked in, and we made sure that they were all equally satisfied when they were working in areas that had windows, like that they appreciated the same kind of architecture. So we made sure that they were all even across that measurement. And then we gave them perceptions of job satisfaction instruments. We measured their job satisfaction, and we asked them things about their position and their demographics and their salary in order to try to make sure that we could take those kinds of variables out of the equation. And we found that people were the happiest in their job when they were working with either a window or a plant, and that sometimes a plant was an okay substitute for a window, and especially that was true with males in the study. And the only people who were rating their jobs as and their work life as being a miserable sort of situation were, and that was the wording, were those that had neither a plant nor a window.
What about fake plants? Did you try that as a variable?
I did not ask about fake plants. So see, that would be like one of those situations where, again, sometimes that research brings up another variable. However, I can tell you that I can't remember the author, and I apologize for that, but there has been a study that was conducted using seniors. It was on a study of seniors, and they were presented with slides, like a big screen that showed plants that had flowers. And so it was just rotating through specifically a bunch of crepe myrtle trees that either had just the leaves or flowers. And they were measuring how social people were in those environments and how calm they were. And the photographs of the plants worked better than if there were no plant photos. There have been other studies too that have looked into people's, there was a study again done in a dentist office, I believe, where they had pictures of either abstract art or a blank wall or plant, and people responded better to the plant material than anything else in terms of their fears.
So I wonder if even having, if you have an office where people come to work, if you have as their screensaver, if you have pictures of a jungle or plants or waterfalls or natural things, or even just posters on the wall, maybe that would be something that would help people better than nothing.
Given some of the research, I think that that's better than nothing.
Yeah. Was there anything you saw in the research that was weird, like made no sense or was counter to what seems logical?
Most of the times, if it's coming out that, for publication, a lot of times it's going to be in support of the hypotheses that we've seen. I haven't seen anything odd that I'm remembering right off the bat.
Okay. What kind of future studies are you thinking about doing? Maybe you're in the process now, but can't release the data. But, what kind of experimentation are you excited about doing in the coming future?
We're working with a group of seniors this semester. So, we have kind of a loneliness epidemic, especially amongst seniors. And I mentioned that we did some studies with little kids that showed that if they're around plants and engaged, that they have better interpersonal reactions, they have better friendships. And so we're working with some senior citizen care facilities and just residential facilities and trying to engage them in a gardening program to see if we can look into perceptions of hope and instances of loneliness. So that's one thing that we're working on this semester. I'm kind of excited about that.
Yeah, one more story, if you don't mind, comes to mind. My mom years ago used to work inside this huge glass building, but they made the atrium into, I guess like a plant conservatory. They had like a waterfall. It was very humid. They had all these tropical plants, and you could walk pathways through it. It was really cool. And they had people take their wedding photos there, and it was just a nice experience to walk in there and be it felt like you were kind of in the jungle in certain spots. So it made the building a lot nicer. So I guess that's maybe an example of some of these things and their possible benefits.
A lot of times people do feel more at ease. That's what we found in green spaces. And in that way, then I think that sometimes people are more often to kind of let their guard down. Of course, like in a plant program, you're automatically pushed into a situation where you're doing something actively in a group. So yeah, we've got that part covered, that they've taken the first step to, engage in a community.
I remember the game Plants vs. Zombies. I don't know if you ever played that, but for some reason it came to mind. It was funny. Because the plants were the good guys and the zombies were the bad guys. So it kind of goes along with it.
Yeah, we take plants for granted a lot of times. That there is this phenomenon called plant blindness where, sometimes if people are describing a situation and stuff, we just sort of take the plants for granted, either in a scene or in a space. It can be difficult when you're trying to teach people about like valuable trees versus invasive species and stuff if people rank everything the same. So yeah, we want people to be able to see and appreciate the plant material because they do more for us than we give them credit for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, very good. How can people follow your research? Where can they go to see what you're doing and, look at the experimental results and everything, maybe see photos? What's a good spot for them to go?
All of our research is posted on ResearchGate, under my name. That's where I normally send people if they are interested in, following my work or trying to look for a particular article that's been published.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it. And it's, you're doing a good thing. Seems like plants just bring more calmness and happiness to people of all ages and dispositions. And it would be nice if they were around in more places rather than just maybe sprinkled on your food at a restaurant, at work. I think about like, let's say kitchens, in restaurants, they usually seem to be very bleak places with all artificial lighting. And even though they're making food, everything's kind of just gray and industrial. So I'm getting a picture and a feeling from what you're saying on why it's important to have plants everywhere.
Right.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.